All right, we're back. The We've been dealing in Southern California with the fires. The Big Palisades fire has not been too far from us, but luckily we weren't really affected by it besides air quality. So thank you to the first responders and the people who were working so diligently to keep the community safe. We saw many churches, our church, and many throughout become resource centers and day shelters and so on. So there's been a tremendous amount of community outreach and support, and people helped, donations like crazy. So it's great to see a city like this uh, have such a heartful grounding in all of that. In the last month, unfortunately, both my wife and I got sick. I threw my back out, which I've never done before, and that was horrible. And then we went back and got sick again, and work's been crazy. So it's taken a little bit to get back to rolling, but in the process, I actually got super lucky and found some hooker super competition headers on Facebook Marketplace. So here's where it gets really cool. So not only did I find them and they're ceramic coated, but they're long tube specific for the car, which is not easy to find. In fact, I didn't even find these by like searching 62 to 67 Nova long tube headers or anything like that. I was just randomly scrolling on the marketplace page,
My mom told me if I wait for things, like good things will happen to me, dude.
um, and they popped up. So then they're not only ceramic coated,
Hell yeah.
they're not only for the car,
Hell yeah.
but then on top of it, they're literally brand new and have never been mounted. So these flanges are perfect shape. And then on top of it, the these are 20-year-old manufacture. They've been brand new since then. They have the thicker flanges, the thicker piping, so they're more durable than a lot of the stuff that is more modernly manufactured.
Hell yeah.
And then the dude not only basically sold them to me for half the cost of new,
Hell yeah.
but then he drove it over and delivered it to me for less than half the cost of new.
Hell yeah.
We actually got to almost like bond a little bit because he was doing a 64 Nova, like we're doing. He actually had a 1968 302 from a Z28 Camaro that he was putting in it, but they never finished the project. So like this is almost like a handoff and a continuation of him starting his efforts and then seeing it at least go that step further. With that, he actually still has that engine. So he's thinking about maybe picking up something else, another Camaro or something to maybe put that in. But he had no use for the headers, headers that he didn't use 20 years ago. So I went ahead and picked up some exhaust insulation wrap, the Cool It Tech, the copper, um, and did the driver's side header. But I figured today we'll go through and do the passenger side header together and show you how I got it to be, uh, I think looks pretty good and it's very secure. And a couple of little tips that I use when doing something like this to just give it that little extra detail. Now, it's super common for people to say, don't wrap ceramic coated headers, it'll ruin them. But it's really anecdotal. Usually, it's areas of like high moisture, rainy, snowy, really wet regions that a lot of these people complain about these issues with. And when you talk to and see different people discussing their wrapping, the manufacturers of the headers, so like Hooker, different exhaust wrap companies, DEI, and so on and so forth, they say perfectly fine to do so. The big thing is just not trapping moisture in the wrapping. And so there's a couple little things that we can do to help keep that from happening. For one, we don't live in a super wet area. So there's not a tremendous amount of risk of them getting super saturated from like dew in the morning or too much rain or so on. So not leaving them uncovered is really, really important. But then also kind of sealing them up in the process. So I'll kind of run you guys through what I'm doing here. I still have work to do to finish up the fenders and whatnot, and I'm gonna get to that stuff. It's just like I got a brand new shiny part, so I wanted to play with the brand new shiny part. So one of the challenges that does happen with ceramic headers is the fact that because they're coated and they're basically like tumble polished to get this finish, is that unlike painted headers, they don't have a lot of tension on the surface that you can use. And so when you start wrapping, right, if I give this a couple layers and lay it over, like it is so slick that you start to have this pull, and when you're trying to pull and tension it, it just wants to slide off and make the job more difficult. So there's one little trick I like to do, which is to put on just a tack coat of some high temp clear coat. And it's not to preserve the finish of the header. It's realistically just to give it a texture so that when you start laying the wrap on the header, that it'll actually stick a little bit easier. Now you could go ahead and use the stainless steel bands and secure it down, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. But this is a nice little way in which I can start the process to make things a little simpler, and you don't need to let it dry for a really long time. So I'm just going to coat the flange. I'm going to just hit this whole thing very kind of loosely. I'm not trying to do a super coat. Anything, I'll get the bottom. I'll flip them over and get the top. And it's just something to give it a little bit of tack, a little bit of grip. I don't need them to dry perfectly. I don't need any of that. I just need tension, friction, and this will do that. Now, when you're doing a wrap with these, it's important to have a strategy. And I had a thought on these that I was going to kind of cover this tube here because it was going to be kind of a weird piece and whatnot, because you're supposed to start at the collector and make your way up. Because of the shape of this, this is kind of the only tube that really gets soloed down here. And then this one gets soloed here. So I'm actually going to, as a group, wrap them to here, then transfer to wrapping these 3 tubes together to here, and then drop down to these 2 tubes to finish out this. So then this one gets isolated here, this one gets isolated here, and then that's it. Now, because of that, I'm actually going to start the solo wrap here on this tube and here on this tube before I do the collector wrap, because that's going to kind of come over and just cover the ends of that. And then it'll, for one, it'll make it look a little better. But two, it should function a little bit better as well. So that's the idea. We'll see how it goes. So here's a little tip. Being that I'm going to have all of this together to here, this is going to be solo here and up, right? And then these are going to continue doubled from here. I'm going to cover this area, like I said, first. When you're trying to kind of predict how much wrap you need, because this thing is not going to feed through, is that you can actually just kind of put it on the end and then do like a little, let's grab some of this. Whatever. And you can kind of do this back and forth over the edge of it, leaving like a little bit of looseness, because there's more than enough material to cover this whole header, right? And so as I do this, and just kind of do like a double fold. and I'll leave like a little half overlap, like a 50% overlap, rather than a 1/4 inch, which is probably like a 1/8%, so 12.5% overlap. So then I'll get to here, and I know I can cut this right here. So I'm just gonna leave that right at the edge and go get the scissors. So I know you saw that I'm over by the row of parked Ford Focus and Fiesta STs with burble tunes. I will say that I apologize for the scenery. They are just trash cans, and if you don't like that, I'm sorry. All right, so we'll get to the low part, we'll feed it through. We've got everything we need to get us to the upper portion. So I'm just gonna feed the end like this, get a couple pre-wraps. Not like Blackwoods, but like, or what are those called? Blackwoods? Backwoods? Pre-rolls? Something like that. Much like I did before, I'm gonna fold the end, then I'm gonna get that overlap. I think I'll probably just time lapse this. No. Why might you want to wrap your headers or exhaust? Well, so the big benefit, there's two trains of thought on the benefit. One of them is reducing underhood temps. So this will help with your inlet air temperature, which is always a good thing, right? Cooler air going into the engine usually means better combustion. The other thing is, when you have exhaust gases and they start to cool, they start to slow down. And so if we can keep the temperature in the tube higher or warmer and less cooling, it'll actually improve the exhaust scavenging. What does that mean? That means the way in which there's actually, not to say a vacuum effect, but a better reduction in pressure in the tube, much like people love to talk about back pressure on exhaust systems, right? Very common, popular topic. And, you know, the boogeyman of horsepower when it comes to restriction and so on. This can help with reducing the boogeyman problem that way. So scavenging is a good thing. This is a positive thing. Like, you know, going back from, you know, some of the work of Smokey Yunick. You know, he was one of the people who really early on kind of figured out that scavenging occurred, or how to improve scavenging. But as I'm getting to the end here, I really hope I got enough. I think I did. Like I said, I don't go all the way up to the flange, and that's because it's going to make it hard to get our exhaust manifold bolts in. So we don't need that problem. There we go. We've got our last wrap. We do our fold. We run our first tie and go to the end. And I see a spot where the overlap didn't really happen. So all I'm going to do is loosen that up a little bit. get that pulled a little tighter. Make sure we get that coverage we want, right? Cool. So then I'm going to finger tighten this guy, and I'll give you guys a closer look at the tool function here. If it's going to snug up by finger. All right, so with the tool, I usually always do it upside down, but I'll do it this way because you just get a little bit better clearance with it. But you're going to feed it through the center, right through the slot, all the way to the end. Run it up, and then you just ratchet it. It'll grip it. You can hold tight. Like I said, I like just grab it and snap it off because it doesn't leave anything right here, and it holds it nice and tight in place. And then I'll add a second in a good spot where if there is a little barb, I'm not likely to cut myself because I can see it. Because I don't know, I'm like a lot of other guys. Like, I don't enjoy cutting myself. I'm not emo. Like, even though like Thrice is my favorite band, and some people used to think of them as emo, they never really were. Boom. Two beautiful, nice, snug straps. That thing is going nowhere.
Where you going? Nowhere. That's right.
All right, so let's move on to the collector. So this is kind of the same start and end. We want to take that edge, give it a fold to keep the end that can fray a little protected, and then, you know, I'm gonna just kind of top to bottom this thing. We've got this big fat roll here to work with, but just to make things a little easier, I'm gonna pre-wrap a few layers by rolling this guy tight. Then once we have our starting point, fold, quarter and trap. And realistically, guys, like, be legitimate about your quarter inch wrap. Like, don't do an 1/8 inch and call it a quarter inch, because we all know what you probably say with the 4 inches we're all packing. So much like that. So I remember I did criminal justice in junior college, and I loved the subject. I never became a cop. Just not for me. And in that process, I think it was a penal code or a criminology class, we had a girl ask, "Hey, why is it that when you're undercover as a cop, if you're asked by a criminal, that if you're a cop, you have to say yes?" And he looked at her with just this disbelief, and he holds up his pinky, and he goes, "If you believe that, then you probably believe a guy tells you that this is 6 inches." And that would never fly in college classrooms now, but it was one of the funniest things I've ever witnessed, and I will never forget. As you can see, it just was a lot of feeding through, getting to that point. Now, when you're getting to this where you have multiple collectors, like, having a little more overlap is okay because you have a lot more space in the wrapping on the inside, so you can get away with a little bit more overwrap. But when you're doing individual tubes, you don't want to do too much overlap, because you can sometimes retain too much heat, right? And could affect the metallurgy of it all, and we don't want that, right? We want these things to stay nice and solid and strong. We don't need them breaking down on us. Do headers last forever? Not really, right? Like, we kind of know, like, things erode over time. It's called entropy. It's just the way of, just laws of physics or stuff like that. Got a little gap here on the bottom. I don't want that gap. I want it covered. Is it going to be critical? Not really, but let's just, if I can deal with it now, like, why not? Right? Why not? Like, because even here, like, there's a little bit of space in here, so we will have some stuff that, like, gets out, but it'll still be a positive effect from where we started, right? Like, overall, this is going to be a net positive, not neutral or negative. So one thing that might help is I pull the build tab out. But what I literally do is, after I get this thing wrapped like this, is I take the VHT and I just soak it, top and bottom. Start with the bottom, because I can just go to flip it directly over. We've got a couple bare spots, but it is what it is. I literally just soak all this up. So by getting all this wet, it's going to go all the way through it against the metal and create even more of a stick. Like, some manufacturers actually have their own spray for this, and that's kind of what they're doing, is spraying this down, wetting it. And I could be wrong, right? I mean, DEI wants to send me some stuff and I can completely rewrap this with their titanium version. Hey, I would be all for it. But by doing this, we seal the copper on just a little better, because it has a tendency to flake off, right? We also get it to stick to the tubes more as we soak it. So then as it dries, it tacks up a little better and is less likely to shift. And then, because I don't care about it getting a little dirty on the bottom, I just flip it right over. So you'll see this get darker as I get it sprayed, so you kind of know where your coverage has been. Just get it on there, get it to change color. Just nice and wet with this. You don't have to worry about drips, nothing. It'll get nice and sticky. And then stick the tubes, and then keep its shape. Won't slide anywhere. And then just for fun, I'm going to add one tie just right there because it'll fit small tubes and long tubes, and because they are not the ties that require the ratcheting holes, you don't need to worry about covering a certain amount of distance with them. And we're done. Just let this dry. I got them both done now. And then when it comes time to put them on the car, we get to put them on the car. So thanks for watching.